The call came on a Tuesday morning, and I remember that detail because I had just poured my second cup of coffee and was about to sit down with the newspaper, something I've done every morning for the past 30 years. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Unknown number. Local area code. I almost let it go to voicemail. "Is this Harold Beckett?" "It is," I said. "Mr. Beckett, my name is Joseph Ingram. I'm the branch manager at First Consolidated Bank on Meridian Avenue. I'm sorry to bother you so early, but I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Did you authorize your wife to transfer funds from your joint investment account? The full balance, $87,000. I set the coffee mug down. "I did not," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. A pause on his end. "Then, sir, I think you need to come in, today if possible, before noon." I hung up and stood in my kitchen for a long moment, looking at nothing. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a mockingbird was going through its whole repertoire in the oak tree. I had planted that tree 26 years ago, the spring after our son was born. My wife, Dorothy, had picked out the spot. I called her cell phone. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I called again. Same thing. I put on my jacket, got in the truck, and drove to the bank. Dorothy and I had been married for 38 years. We met at a church picnic in Raleigh, North Carolina, the summer of 1986. She was 24 and laughing at something her friend had said, and I thought it was the best sound I had ever heard. We were married the following spring. We raised 2 children in the same house we still lived in. Our son, Gregory, now 35, living up in Vermont with his family, and our daughter, Allison, who lived 20 minutes away with her husband and our 2 grandchildren. 38 years. I thought I knew everything there was to know about that woman. I walked into the bank at 10:15. Joseph Ingram met me in the lobby, mid-50s. Reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, the kind of careful expression a man gets when he's about to deliver news he'd rather not. He walked me back to a private office and closed the door. "Mr. Beckett," he said, "yesterday afternoon a woman identifying herself as your wife came in with a signed document, a letter of authorization, requesting a full transfer of your joint investment account to a personal checking account. The account was opened 3 days ago, in her name only." He slid a folder across the desk. I opened it. The signature looked like mine. It wasn't mine. I've signed my name the same way for 60 years, a tight, forward-leaning script my 3rd-grade teacher made me practice until my hand cramped. Whatever was on that paper, it wasn't my signature. It was a decent attempt, but the loop on the B was wrong. "My name is Harold Beckett. I've signed it 100,000 times." "I didn't sign this," I said. Ingram nodded slowly. "I suspected as much. Our teller processed it, but when she mentioned it to me afterward, the amount, the new account, the timing, I felt I needed to verify. I'm sorry we didn't catch it sooner." "Where did the money go?" "It's sitting in the new account as of this morning. It hasn't moved yet. We've placed a temporary hold pending your notification." "But Mr. Beckett," he hesitated. "This is the 3rd time in 6 weeks that your wife has come in. The previous 2 times, she made smaller withdrawals from the joint checking. Each time she said it was for home repairs. Combined, that's another $14,000. I sat back in the chair. $87,000 from the investment account, $14,000 from checking, $101,000. The money we had saved across 4 decades. The money meant for retirement, for emergencies, for the grandchildren's college funds. I thanked Joseph Ingram. I asked him to hold the transfer, and he said he already had. I asked him what I needed to do to protect the remaining accounts, and he walked me through every step, changing account access, requiring dual authorization, flagging anything unusual. By the time I walked out into the parking lot, it was past noon. I sat in my truck and didn't move for 10 minutes. Then I drove, and I didn't go home. I went to my daughter Allison's house. She was surprised to see me on a weekday. She stood in the doorway in a paint-stained sweatshirt, the kids at school, and I could tell from the way her face shifted when she looked at mine that she knew something was wrong. I'm not a man who shows up unannounced with that kind of face, unless something is wrong. "Dad, what happened? Can I come in?" I said. She made coffee. I sat at her kitchen table, a table I had helped her carry up the front steps when she and her husband, Derek, first moved in, and I told her about the bank call. The forged signature, the $100,000. While I talked, she sat very still, the way she used to sit as a little girl when I was telling her something serious. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Dad," she said carefully, "where is Mom right now?" "I don't know," I said. "She wasn't home this morning when I left. Phone goes to voicemail." Something moved across Allison's face, something I couldn't quite read. "She called me yesterday," Allison said. "She said she was going to visit Aunt Carol in Greensboro for a few days. Said it was last minute." I looked at her. "Did she?" I said. "I didn't think anything of it. You know how she and Aunt Carol are." She paused. "Dad, Aunt Carol called me this morning, asking if everything was okay with Mum. Said she hadn't heard from her in weeks." The kitchen was very quiet. I drove home, and I sat in the living room, and I thought about everything I knew and everything I didn't. And then I thought about what a man is supposed to do when the life he built starts to come apart at the seams. I could have raged. I could have driven to every hotel in the county. I could have called her phone every 5 minutes until she picked up or threw it in a river. Instead, I went to my desk and opened a legal pad, and I started writing things down. Dates, amounts, details. Everything I could remember from the past 6 months that seemed odd in retrospect. The late evenings she said she was at book club. The weekend she drove to a friend's baby shower 2 hours away without inviting me to drop her off. The new email address I'd glimpsed on her laptop when she'd left it open. Small things, each of them forgettable on their own. Together, they added up to a shape I didn't want to look at. I wrote for 2 hours. Then I called my attorney. Robert Dalton had been my attorney for 20 years. He handled our wills, our property transfers, the paperwork when we refinanced the house. He was a calm, methodical man who never used 2 words when one would do, and when I told him what the bank had told me, he was quiet for a moment and then said, "Harold, don't touch anything. Don't move money. Don't confront her. Don't send any emails or texts about this. Come see me tomorrow morning." I was there at 8 o'clock. He pulled up our accounts, our property deeds, everything he had on file. He confirmed what I suspected. The house was in both our names, which meant she couldn't sell it without my signature, but she had apparently already spoken to a real estate agent. He found the inquiry on a shared email account we used for household bills. The agent had sent comparative market analysis. 3 comparable homes on our street. An estimate of what ours would fetch. She was building towards something, Robert said. He said it the way a doctor says a diagnosis, not unkindly, just precisely. "I know," I said. "Do you know who she's been with?" I told him I didn't. Not yet. He told me what I needed. A private investigator for documentation. A formal account of the forgery filed with the bank and potentially with law enforcement. A separation of assets before she could make another move. He laid it out like a checklist, and I wrote down every item, and when I left his office, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Clear. Not better, not okay, but clear. Like when a storm finally breaks and the air goes cold and clean. I hired the investigator that afternoon. His name was Frank DeLuca, retired sheriff's deputy, quiet voice, firm handshake. I told him everything I knew. He told me to give him 72 hours. I went home and I waited. She called me that evening. Said she was in Greensboro with her sister and was having a lovely time and missed me, and had I remembered to water the plants. I said yes, I'd watered them. I asked how Carol was doing. She said Carol was fine, just tired. We talked for 4 minutes. I told her to drive safe when she came home. She said she would. I put the phone down and looked at the plants. They were fine. I had watered them. I did not sleep well that night, or the night after. I am 63 years old, and I have buried my parents. I have sat with friends through illness and divorce and loss. I have seen hard things. But there is a particular kind of loneliness in lying in a bed you have shared with someone for nearly 4 decades and knowing, not suspecting, knowing that something has broken beyond repair. You lie there and you think about the person they were, or the person you thought they were, and you wonder which memories are real and which ones were a performance. And that is a question with no clean answer. On the 3rd morning, Frank DeLuca called. "I have what you need," he said. "Can you meet me this afternoon?" I met him at a diner off I-40. He had a manila envelope. Inside, photographs, a hotel check-in record, timestamps. Dorothy had not gone to Greensboro. She was 45 minutes from our house at a Marriott in Carrier, North Carolina. She had checked in under her own name. She had been there since Monday. The man she was with was not a stranger. It was Derek. My daughter's husband. I looked at the photographs for a long time without speaking. Frank DeLuca said nothing. He understood, I think, that there are moments when silence is the only appropriate response. Derek, who had sat at my Thanksgiving table 11 times. Derek, who had stood in my backyard in June and grilled hamburgers while my grandchildren ran through the sprinkler. Derek, who had shaken my hand the day he asked for my daughter's hand, and looked me in the eye and told me he would take care of her. Allison had no idea. That was the part that undid me, not my own marriage. Though God knows that was enough. It was my daughter. Sitting 20 minutes away in that house, raising 2 children, trusting a man who was spending long weekends 45 minutes away with her mother. I drove home. I sat in the truck in the driveway for a while. Then I went inside and added Derek's name to the legal pad. What I did not do was call either of them. I did not drive to the hotel. I did not call Allison, not yet. That was the hardest part. Everything in me wanted to protect her immediately, to call her right then and say, "Allison, I need you to listen to me." But Robert had been clear. Document first, confront second. Once you tip your hand, they scramble. Once they scramble, things get complicated. So I documented. I took Frank's photographs to Robert's office. Robert filed the forgery complaint with the bank and began working with law enforcement on the financial fraud angle. A forged signature on a transfer of that size is a felony in North Carolina. That's not something that quietly disappears. Robert also connected me with a family law attorney, a woman named Patricia Owens, who specialized in high-conflict divorce. She was sharp, direct, and wasted no time. She had seen variations of this story before, she said. Not the exact same. The details were always different. But the pattern: a spouse liquidating assets, building an exit with someone else's help, timing it for maximum damage. The good news, Patricia said, is that she moved too soon. If she'd waited another year, been more careful, you might have lost more. She got impatient. She got impatient, I repeated. People always do, she said. Dorothy came home on Thursday. She walked through the front door with a small overnight bag and a box of pralines she said Carol had sent for me. Carol always knew I liked pralines, and she kissed me on the cheek and said it was good to be home. I said it was good to have her back. I had dinner on the stove, a pot of chili I'd made from scratch, something I used to make every fall, and we ate at the kitchen table and talked about the weather and the grandchildren and a show she'd been watching. She did not know that I knew. I have never been an actor. I have always been told I wear my feelings plainly on my face. But I discovered that night that a man can hold a great deal inside him when the reason is right. I thought about Allison. I thought about my grandchildren. I thought about the oak tree in the front yard, and the 38 years of a life that had felt, until very recently, like the truest thing I had. We did the dishes together. She went to bed early, said she was tired from the drive. I sat in the living room with the lights low and went over everything one more time. The next morning I drove to Allison's school. She taught 4th grade at an elementary school 2 miles from her house, and I waited in the parking lot until her prep period, when I knew she'd be in her classroom alone. I texted her from outside, "Can you step out for 5 minutes? I'm in the lot. It's important." She came out in her teacher's lanyard, looking worried. I walked her to a bench by the playground fence away from the windows. I told her everything. I have had hard conversations in my life. I have told my children when pets died, when relatives had cancer, when the world turned out to be harsher than I had led them to believe. But telling my daughter that her husband and her mother had been together, that was the hardest thing I have ever done. She went white, then red, then something I can only describe as very still. She didn't cry, not right away. She sat on that bench and stared at the fence for a long time. "How long?" she finally said. "I don't know exactly," I said. "Frank is trying to establish the timeline. Could be 6 months, maybe more." She looked at me. Her eyes were dry and her jaw was set, and she looked, in that moment, exactly like her grandmother. My mother. A woman who had survived real hardship and never once crumbled in public. "What do we do?" she said. "You don't do anything yet," I said. "Let me and the attorneys handle the first part. Then you'll have everything you need for your own case." She nodded once. Tight, controlled. Then she stood up, straightened her lanyard, and said she had to get back inside. I stood too, and she turned and hugged me very hard, and I felt her shoulders shake once, just once, before she pulled back and walked to the door. I drove home and called Robert. Dorothy was served the following Monday morning. I had gone to get groceries, or that's what I told her, and when I came back, she was standing in the kitchen with the papers in her hand, and a look on her face I had never seen before. "Harold." "Don't," I said, quietly. I set the grocery bags on the counter and turned to face her. "Just don't." She tried anyway. She said it had been a mistake. She said she was sorry. She said she hadn't meant for any of this to happen. She used the words that people use when they are caught, all the soft, shapeless words that are really just requests for you to make it easier on them. I told her about the bank. I told her about the forged signature. I told her about the $101,000. I watched her face as I said each number. "The account has been frozen," I said. "The transfer was reversed. Robert has filed the forgery complaint. You'll want to get your own attorney." She started to cry. I had seen Dorothy cry many times in 38 years. I knew every variation. This was not grief. This was fear. "Is Allison?" she started. "Allison knows," I said. She closed her eyes. I left the room. I went out to the garage and I stood there for a while among the tools and the old bicycles and all the particular accumulated weight of a life shared, and I let myself feel it, the full sadness of it, because I had been holding it at arm's length for 2 weeks, and it needed somewhere to go. I stood there in the garage, and I let it come. Then I went back inside and made myself a sandwich and called Gregory in Vermont. The divorce took 14 months. Dorothy's attorney was competent but not exceptional, and between the forgery charge, the fraud documentation, and Frank's photographs, which became relevant to asset division under North Carolina's fault-based divorce statutes, Patricia Owens did her job thoroughly. The house went to me, along with the majority of the retirement accounts, given the attempted theft. Dorothy received her portion of what was legally hers, nothing more. The forgery charge was reduced through her attorney's negotiations with the DA's office, but it remained on her record. She paid the legal fees herself. Allison filed her own divorce papers within the month. Derek, it turned out, had also been quietly moving money. Not as much and not as skillfully, and his own attorney had little to work with. Allison kept the house, the children's school stability, and a settlement that Patricia had helped her negotiate when she referred her to a colleague equally sharp. Derek moved to an apartment in Durham. I have not spoken to him since the day I sat in that diner and saw the photographs. I don't imagine I ever will. Dorothy moved into a rental condo in Cary. I have heard through Gregory that she is not with Derek anymore. That the whole thing, whatever it was, collapsed under the weight of its own consequences. I can't say I was surprised. Things built on betrayal have a structural problem from the start. I am not going to pretend I came through this unchanged. I am 63 years old, and I live alone in a house with an oak tree in the front yard and 38 years of furniture, and some evenings the quiet is very loud. I have good days and harder days, and I am honest with myself about which is which. But I'll tell you what I also have. I have Sunday dinners with Allison and the grandchildren every week without fail. I have learned to make 4 new recipes since the divorce, which is 3 more than I expected to learn at my age. I have called Gregory more in the past year than in the previous 5 combined. I have had coffee twice with Joseph Ingram from the bank. He turned out to be a decent man who coaches Little League on weekends, and I have thought often about the fact that he didn't have to make that call. He could have processed the transfer and moved on. Instead, he picked up the phone. I think about him every time someone says that one person can't make a difference in a situation. The legal pad I started that Tuesday morning has 43 pages in it. I filled every line. When it was over, when the papers were signed and the account separated and the attorneys paid, I took that pad out to the fire pit in the backyard and I burned it page by page. Not because I wanted to forget, but because it was done and I didn't need to carry it anymore. The mockingbird is still in the oak tree. He was singing this morning when I had my coffee. I have started leaving the window open so I can hear him better. That is where I am. That is how it ended and how something else began. I've been thinking a lot about the oak tree lately. I planted it the spring after my son was born, 35 years ago, and it never asked for much, just water, just time, just room to grow in the right direction. I think about the people in this story the same way. The ones who did right by me weren't the ones with the most to gain. Joseph Ingram at the bank didn't have to pick up that phone. He could have processed the transfer, logged the transaction, and moved on with his Tuesday. He didn't. Frank DeLuca didn't have to be gentle when he handed me that envelope at the diner. He could have just slid it across the table and looked away. He wasn't hired to be kind. But he understood, without my saying so, that some information needs a moment of quiet around it. I think the people who do the right thing when it costs them nothing special are still choosing something. They're choosing to pay attention. They're choosing to act on what they see. That's not a small thing. That's actually the thing. And then there's what Dorothy chose. 38 years of a shared life, and she chose to chip away at it quietly, the small withdrawals first, then the big one, then the forged signature, then the lie about Greensboro. Each step required a decision. Each decision was made in full awareness of what she was dismantling. I used to ask myself whether she thought about me at all during those months, whether she considered what it would do to Allison, to the grandchildren, to the structure of a family that 4 people depended on. I've stopped asking. The answer doesn't change anything, and I've come to understand that the why matters less than the what, and the what was clear. What I keep coming back to is this: nothing that happened to Dorothy and Derek was visited upon them by luck or coincidence. They built their own consequences, one choice at a time. The forgery left a paper trail. The hotel stay left a record. The real estate inquiry left a digital footprint. None of it disappeared on its own. They moved through the world as though they were invisible, and they weren't. And I had to decide who I was going to be in the middle of all of it. That was the part nobody tells you about when something like this happens. The injury is one thing. What you do while you're injured is another. I could have raged and tipped my hand and lost everything in court. I could have collapsed and let them finish what they started. Instead, I got a legal pad and a good attorney, and I kept my mouth shut, and I protected my daughter the best way I could, which was by being patient long enough to give her something solid to stand on. I am not a perfect man. I have made my share of mistakes across 63 years, and I don't imagine I'm finished making them. But I know what it means now to hold yourself together, not because you're not hurting, but because someone else needs you to. Allison needed me to be steady, so I was steady. That took more out of me than anything I have ever done professionally or otherwise, and I am more proud of it than almost anything I can name. The oak tree is still there. The mockingbird is still in it. Some mornings, that's enough.